You ever look at a food label, see 0 grams of fat, but then you glance at the ingredients and wait a minute, there's oil in there? How is that even possible? You gotta wonder, are companies just lying to us? Well, the answer is way more interesting than you think. So let me just ask you straight up. When you see this on a package, do you actually believe it's zero? I mean, really zero? If you've ever felt just a little bit skeptical, you are definitely on the right track. Because that zero, well, it might not be zero at all. And the secret here? It isn't some sneaky marketing trick or a weird loophole. Nope. It's actually a super strict set of rules. It's a kind of mandatory math that every single food producer has to follow right down to the decimal. And today, we're going to crack that code. Okay, so let's officially open up our case file on what I'm calling the 0 gram mystery. So here's the crazy part, the central paradox. It is completely 100% legal for a product that literally has fat-containing ingredients, think cooking spray made from oil, to slap 0 grams total fat on its nutrition label. And this isn't a mistake. It's actually the required final answer from a very, very specific process. So how in the world do they get there? Well, it all comes down to a regulated 4-step calculation. And this isn't just a set of loose guidelines. It's a precise formula that turns a whole complicated recipe into those simple little numbers you see on the back of the box. The whole process unfolds in 4 key steps. First, it starts with a core calculation, something called a weighted average. Then, that number gets scaled down to the serving size. Third, they calculate the percentage of your daily value. And finally, and this is the big one, this is where our mystery gets solved, the 4th step. Regulatory rounding. All right, step 1 is the foundation for everything. It's called the weighted average. This is where you figure out the nutrient content for the entire batch of the product, usually per 100 grams. It looks at every single ingredient, from the main stuff like flour all the way down to the tiniest pinch of spice. And it adds up its exact nutritional contribution based on how much of it is in the recipe. You know, a really great way to think about this is like a cash register at the grocery store. The weighted average is the subtotal. It's adding up the nutritional price of every single ingredient in your shopping cart before any other taxes or discounts get applied. It's just the pure, unadjusted total for the whole shebang. Now, steps 2 and 3 are pretty straightforward. They take that big subtotal for the whole batch, and they just shrink it down to the amount you're actually likely to eat, the serving size. Then for some nutrients, they compare that serving size amount to the official daily reference value, like the 2,300 milligram daily limit for sodium, and that's how you get that percentage that you see all the way on the right side of the label. Okay, but now we get to it. We've arrived at the final and honestly the most crucial step. This is where the mathematical reality of what's in the food smacks right into the legal requirements of what has to be on the label. This is the rounding rule's secret. Which, of course, brings us right back to our big question. If those first 3 steps are all about being super precise with the math, then where does that 0 even come from? And here it is. This table right here shows the Food and Drug Administration's mandatory rounding rules. This is the key to the entire mystery. Just look at that top line for total fat. If the calculated value per serving is less than 0.5 grams, the company must, it's not a choice, they must display it as 0 grams. That's the law. So let's just imagine a serving of that cooking spray. After all the careful, precise math is done, the manufacturer calculates that one serving contains this much fat, 0.49 grams. Factually, scientifically, there is fat in there. But because that number is less than 0.5, the FDA rules require them to put this on the label, 0. That tiny, real amount of fat gets rounded away into regulatory nothingness. And that, right there, is the secret. And you know, this system applies to way more than just fat. For example, if a serving actually calculates to 7 calories, the rules say you have to round it down and display it as 5. Or if it has, say, 12 milligrams of sodium, it gets rounded down to 10. So the numbers you see on the label aren't always the exact raw numbers. They're the legally required display values. Okay, so getting this distinction is really the key. Let's dig into why this label math matters so much, both for us as shoppers and for the companies that are actually making the food. So really, it all boils down to this. There's the calculated value, which is the precise, mathematical, scientific reality of what's in your food. And then there's the displayed value. That's the rounded number that regulations require to be printed on the package. And as we've just seen, Those two numbers are not always the same thing. And listen, for the food producers out there, this isn't just a fun fact. Getting this right is absolutely critical. You can't just use the kind of rounding you learned in school. You have to follow the FDA's specific tables exactly. If you misinterpret these rules or mess up those initial calculations, you could end up with a mislabeled product and get into some very serious trouble with regulators. So the next time you're in the grocery store, you're going to have this new superpower. You'll know that 0 doesn't always mean 0, and that the numbers on that label are telling a very specific, very regulated story. So I'll just leave you with this question. Now that you know the rounding secret, what else on a food label are you going to look at differently?